With Carl Schultz, Director of Environment, Health, and Safety at TE Connectivity. And we're going to be talking today about environmental sustainability programs here at TE. Hi, Carl.
Hi, Kristen.
Thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
So to get us started, could you just tell us a little bit about your role here at TE and maybe something about it that's unique?
Okay, sure. So I lead Environment, Health, and Safety, which includes sustainability aspects. And that means safety is protecting our people, but we're not going to talk about that today. And then the environmental and sustainability piece is about making sure that we run our factories cleanly, that we meet all the laws, and that we do our part to help protect the environment. So that's the sort of overview of what my role is. I say I lead it, but I really work with a lot of different people, and there are a lot of other people who lead our efforts in this area. So we have people in each of our divisions. We have people at our sites. I work with our operations teams and engineering teams. We're a very decentralized company in a lot of ways, or in certain ways. And so it really is a lot of different people is to establish what our goals are. What are we trying to accomplish, what our strategy is. We look at things like, okay, how much are we going to tell people they have to do, and how much are we going to say, look, this is the general direction we're going, you decide how to do that. And we decide, one of the really important things is deciding what makes sense for the company, right, in these areas. And as far as what makes my job unique, I don't know if it's unique, but I guess one aspect that's interesting is, TE is about making products and making money. That's why we're here. My job is really about making sure that as we're making products and as we're making money, that we're doing that responsibly, that we're doing it taking care of our people, taking care of the communities where we operate, and taking care of the broader environment. And don't get me wrong, I love making things. I love making money. And so, it's not that what I do is in any way better than anything else. It's just, it is different in some respects, and fun that way.
Cool, sounds like it. So what are the environmental impacts of TE's operations?
So environmental impacts, or how our business, how our operations, how everything we do has an effect on the environment. Number of things. So number one is our impact on greenhouse gas emissions, or greenhouse gas emissions from our operations. Mm-hmm. Greenhouse gas emissions, some people would recognize more as global warming, carbon footprint. So the greenhouse gas emissions that result from our operations is one of our environmental impacts, and that results from our use of energy. So we can get into that a little more later. We also use water in our operations, and so both the using water, withdrawing it from different places, and then discharging wastewater, which in some cases could be clean because we're not doing much with it. In other cases, we used it in some industrial process and we clean it up before we discharge it, but that's another environmental impact. Then we have waste from our operations. Mm-hmm. We have air emissions separate from greenhouse gas emissions, but dust, any kind of chemicals like that, although that's quite small in our operations. So waste, and then products. So our products have an environmental impact in a positive way in the products that they go into, and then also we have chemicals that some things that go into some of the materials that we use, and that's an environmental impact as well. So I think those are the significant impacts that we have.
Gotcha. So is one of these more important than the others? Where is TE focusing when it comes to these impacts?
Well, yes, I would say one is more important than the others. Although we pay attention to all of them. It's just a matter of how much attention we pay and how much, what priority we give different things. Yeah. So I would say that our major impact is greenhouse gas emissions, 90% resulting from our energy use. With water, okay, so, we use a decent amount of water, but we're not, we're not like in the paper industry or beverage industry where we're using just tons and tons. We do use it in some manufacturing processes. And as I said, we do discharge wastewater. And so one of the more significant areas there from an environmental perspective is we use water in processes. We use it for cooling things. We also do a lot of electroplating. So putting coating on metal so it's a good conductor. And so at, I don't know, less than 20% of our plants now, but we have electroplating, and we actually do a lot to make sure that water's clean when we discharge it. Some of our plants, some of our plating operations, we've actually gone to no water discharge. We just recycle as much of the water as we can and then evaporate what's left. So that's an impact from water and wastewater. Waste, of course, any kind of manufacturing process, you have waste. So that, and what else? Air pollution, we very little because of the type of the manufacturing that we do. So, when we looked at all this quite a few years ago, and we determined that greenhouse gas emissions and energy usage was number one. We do look at it from time to time. We see how we're doing. We see if we should, refocus on something else or put more attention on something else. But we do think greenhouse gas emissions is number one. I should mention that there is no, standard or there's nobody that says, okay, this is how you compare water pollution with air pollution, or greenhouse gas emissions of X amount are equivalent to using 1 million gallons of water. So this is I wouldn't say subjective, but there is no global standard. So somebody else might look at us and say, oh no, you really should be paying more attention to water. Okay, but our analysis, and I think it's consistent with the way most people look at these things. Our analysis is that greenhouse gas emissions and energy usage is number one.
Interesting.
And I should tell you about what we're doing on energy.
Yes.
Should I?
Please do.
Okay. So with energy usage and greenhouse gas emissions, like with all our environmental impacts, going back to 2008, 2009, we started comprehensively measuring what we do. So back then it was, I think, 177 locations. So it includes all our factories, major office locations, and everything except a small sales office, basically. We have ships in our subcom business. So we collect data from all those locations around the world on, what the discharges are, what the water usage is, and that sort of thing. So that's critical. You can't manage it if you don't know what you're doing. So we do that. We report both internally and externally what we're doing on all those, but let me focus on energy. We set a goal for reduction, 10% in 3 years. We started that in 2009. We did it again in 2012, and we just set it again from our 2015 baseline. We want to do another 10%. We have people in TE who do energy audits. They go to the plants and they're expert and look and say, gee, if you had a better valve on that, you wouldn't be using as much compressed air, that sort of thing. We put together a lot of resources for all our people, all our plants, on from simple things like what you can do in an office, what you can do without spending any money, to much more sophisticated technical things on energy conservation. And most recently, or fairly recently, we started an energy COE, and that brings together people in the company who have some expertise, also people with interest in energy reduction. And the goal of the COE is just to make sure that knowledge is disseminated and that people are doing the things that make sense. One of the things that's great that all of the COEs, including the energy COE, do is to have what we call ready to deploy projects. And so these are projects that things that have been done at one, oftentimes many TE plants, and we know it's not something unique. Or that's how we choose a project. We say, okay, this is something that could be done at most or maybe all TE plants. Yeah. And so we have a whole way of making those available to people, and then people can sign up and so forth, and we can see what's going on. So those are some of the things that we've done to enable us to reduce our usage. And I probably forgot to mention, we've had a lot of success. We've reduced energy usage on a normalized basis. So when we sort of adjust to how much production we're doing, right? If our volume goes up, energy usage goes up too. So per unit of production, since 2012, in 3 years, we reduced 20% our energy usage. And so all those are some of the things we've done to enable that to occur. What we're doing now, in addition to all those things, is moving into some of the processes. Mm-hmm. And so we're working, I just spoke earlier this morning with our plating engineers about, okay, we know there are opportunities in plating. We know there are opportunities in stamping and molding. Let's make sure we're working together. A lot of what we've done up till now has been buildings and infrastructure because, a good bit of our usage, sometimes, between 40 and 60% of our usage typically is just opening the doors of the plant, turning the lights on, turning on the air conditioning and that sort of thing, regardless of whether you're making product or not. So that's been a focus. And we've done a lot there, but we see new opportunity in working with the processes. And so that's the next step. So there's anything you ever wanted to know about energy reduction?
It is. Out of curiosity, I'm just wondering, for greenhouse gas emissions, I know most of them come from energy use. Are there any that don't come from energy use?
Absolutely. So, I said 90% of our emissions are from energy usage. And energy usage, by the way, is there are two parts. There's for us, most of it is electricity, using electricity. So somebody else's, the electric utility is burning coal or whatever to make the electricity, and we're using it, but we count that. The general rule, the general approach is you count that as a greenhouse gas emission for TE. We also, there are greenhouse gas emissions from ships. From use of fuel. And we use fuel mainly in our ships, but also sometimes for heating a plant, that sort of thing. So that's the 90% energy. I just wanted to mention what went into that. The other 10%, and 20% a few years ago, is our use of SF6 or sulfur hexafluoride. And SF6 is an electrical insulator for high voltage applications. So power plants, electrical switchgear, they use SF6. There's really no alternative to using SF6 in those applications. And we use it in our electron beaming operations. So I won't get into that, even though it's kind of cool. But that uses high voltage. And so we have SF6 in the electron beams. And SF6 is a gas, so people really didn't pay any attention to it. When we started measuring and reporting on greenhouse gas emissions, we saw, oh, look, 20% is coming from SF6 usage. And so how do you get greenhouse gas emissions from that? When the gas is in a container, but when you have to open something to do some maintenance, maybe you need to top it off and add more. In the past, people would just open up and the stuff would go up into the atmosphere and nobody really gave it any thought. But once we started looking, we realized that was happening, And the beam engineers, the experts on the beams, said, okay, maybe there's another way. And I'm leaving a lot of details out, but very simply, what they did was they have what are really fancy vacuum cleaners, that rather than open the door, let the stuff go up. Now they'll connect this vacuum cleaner, pull the gas out, do the work, put it back in. As a result, we've reduced our SF6 emissions and usage by over 80% since 2010. I think that's right here. But it's really been a tremendous decrease. So you asked what the other 10% was, and I threw in a little story about what we've done there. But that's what it is, and it illustrates, as with a lot of the sustainability things that we do, part of the job is just awareness, just getting people thinking, oh, okay, I'm doing this. What is the impact of this? And am I using more energy? Is there a way I can use less? That sort of thing.
Right. And it helps to work at a company with thousands of engineers putting their heads together to help with these efforts, right?
Absolutely. You don't want me working on an electron beam. You don't want me working on maybe a stamping press. But no, it's very sophisticated. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I mentioned before, we're moving into our manufacturing processes along with our buildings and so forth.
Right.
So, the beam, that's an example. That's part of a manufacturing process. In stamping, the engineers there have done something that I find just amazing. I can barely conceive of it, but they promise me it's true. So when you stamp metal, we take strips of metal and you stamp a shape that turns into a connector or a relay or whatever. And in that process, you put oil on the strip of metal. And then after it's been stamped, you want to remove the oil. So the way they did that was with compressed air, right? Just blow with enough pressure to take the oil off. And compressed air, by the way, is really a big part of our energy usage. People think air, it's free, but it's not, because you need all this equipment to compress it, and that uses energy. So in the stamping operations, these stamping machines run at, some run incredibly fast, but say 1,000 strokes per minute. So up and down, this thing is moving 1,000 times a minute. So what these stamping engineers figured out is, rather than have the air blow constantly, they can make it turn on and off 1,000 times a minute. So they're only blowing when there's a part there, and then that little strip of metal in between before the next part comes in. While that's going by, the valve turns off, and then it turns back on 1,000 times a minute. It just amazes me. And that's a great example of the engineer working with our engineering community, right, to do better in energy efficiency.
Right. Yeah, it can really be a company effort, team effort, sounds like.
Absolutely. In TE, how many people do you think work full-time on energy? You have no idea. One. There's one person, and it's not me.
Wow.
So everything we do is working with other people, and it's great that way.
Great. Well, I did want to ask you a little bit about regulations. I know there's many different regulations, and they vary country to country. So is TE doing all of this just to meet those regulations? Is that the only reason, or can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So we take compliance with regulations very seriously. We work very hard at it, and we have a pretty good track record on that. But most of what we do in the sustainability area, we're not doing because of regulations. Because of the type of business we are, and because of the type of operations we have, we're really not subject to regulations on greenhouse gas emissions. There are a couple now. I can think of, there's a city in China that imposed a tax on greenhouse gas emissions that affected us. But direct regulation, at this point anyway, is directed more at the really big emitters, like utilities, chemical plants, that sort of thing. So we're doing it because it makes sense for TE, not because of regulations. And you know, I want to say we're not doing it just because we're nice guys. You know, there's a double benefit here. So it's good for the environment, but when we save energy, we save money as well, and we've saved quite a bit on energy reduction. So we're not doing energy reduction because of regulatory requirements. That may change in the future. You know, I think there will be more regulation, but right now and for the past several years, we've been doing it because it's a good thing to do for the company. Likewise with water reduction, likewise with waste reduction, and I think those are the things. So most of what we do that you would call sustainability is not because of regulatory requirements.
Gotcha. Interesting. So going back to those environmental impacts, I know you talked a lot about energy. Is there anything else that you can tell us about waste and water?
Sure. So let's see. Water, well, with both, when we first set reduction targets, we said we had a 10% reduction target. We achieved that in 2012. So, you know, again, we're measuring and reporting so people know what's going on, what their plan is doing. And I think with water, we haven't so much had big initiatives. It was really a matter of measuring it, saying we wanted to do better, and people starting to think about it. So, you know, in a process, they have the water running all the time, but the process only runs, you know, a couple hours, and then it's off, then it runs again. So people are saying, okay, let's turn the water off when we're not running it. Hundreds, thousands of examples of that add up to significant reductions that we've achieved. We do have one initiative around water right now, which is, you know, I said before, we're not a big major water user, so we don't see it as this massive issue for us. We do have plants all around the world. We have, and we're focused with respect to water on what are known as water-stressed areas. So there's a UN definition, but you know, some places water is more of an issue than others. The Western U.S. versus the East, for example. So in those locations, we're working with the plants to say, okay, you know, let's take a look at where you have opportunities and where you can reduce. And for the rest of the company, it's more of this awareness and measurement and so forth. For waste, it's interesting because waste is, you know, thought of as environmental, and it is. It certainly has an environmental impact. But in terms of driving waste reduction, it's not something where our group needs to do a lot, because T is a manufacturing company. We want to manufacture as efficiently as we can. We want to be a very lean operation. So that means, obviously, you try to use less material. You try to have less waste at the end of the process. So our engineers are always saying, okay, you know, we're plating on 3 square inches. We really only need to plate on 2.5 square inches. So reducing material usage. And then at the other end with waste, if we can design a process so we're throwing out less than we were before.
Right.
I mean, you know, ideally you throw out nothing, but you're cutting out shapes and that sort of thing, and you can't always use every speck of material. So the manufacturing people, it's in their DNA to reduce waste. So we don't have any specific environmental sustainability waste initiative, but we have a company initiative, I would say, to reduce waste, and it's been very effective.
Great. So it just kind of comes naturally to these people working in the manufacturing process.
Yes.
So I know you've talked about it a lot, but are there any other ways that TE's engineers around the world are contributing to our sustainability programs? Any other examples you can tell us?
Sure. The number one way is something that I really haven't talked about so far, and it's really important, I think, and that is with the products that we make. So we make electronic components, and our components go into other products. They go into a lot of cars and trucks and other vehicles, and they go into planes. And there are other examples too, but those are the most obvious ones. So our designers and engineers are working all the time with our customers to make our parts smaller, lighter, greener, faster. And that has a big environmental impact because, when you reduce the weight of a plane, when you reduce the weight of a vehicle, it uses less fuel to operate, results in fewer greenhouse gas emissions and other emissions. So that's really, I'd say, the number one way that engineers are contributing. Then, of course, with the things that I've talked about, the engineers in the processes working on what we can do to reduce energy and water usage in those processes. Engineers work on product design. So in addition to making things smaller and lighter, we look at what substances we're using. So, and this is driven largely by regulation. There are regulations that say, okay, you shouldn't have lead in products, you shouldn't have cadmium. So, and in addition to that, there are customers and groups who are interested in other things. So our engineers work on making sure that we aren't using those materials, finding substitutes, that sort of thing. And probably the other general way, which applies to not only our engineers but all employees, is just being aware and saying, okay, let me turn off the light when I leave the office, and that's the simplest example. But there are millions of things like that. Great. So all kinds of ways.
Great. Well, it certainly sounds like TE's sustainability programs have come a long way since 2008, 2010, and achieved some significant results as you've gone over. Are there any successes that you're most proud of or that stand out to you the most?
So, we've made steady progress over the years. So I think that's a really good thing. It means our sustainability program is sustainable. So, we're not just making this a big deal this year or for 2 years and then we'll move on to something else. It's becoming part of our DNA. We've had steady success. We're getting it really integrated into the company. And the great thing is really when it's not me or my counterparts saying, okay, you should do this, but just people like you and everybody else in this building and through TE saying, what can I do? Right. So that's good. What else? I think employees like what we do. And, not everybody is passionate about environmental protection or energy usage, but a lot of people are. So I think, I'm glad that in my work, I can help make TE a good place, a place people like to work, because a lot of people want to work for a company that they think is doing the right thing in these areas. So It's nice to be able to work on that. And, we also get attention from customers and from investors. It's not number one. I wouldn't suggest that, but we do get some interest and positive feedback from there. So those are some of the things that I'm happy about.
Great. Very good. Well, thank you so much for your time. Sounds like we've been making some great strides. It's great to hear about it and how we're engaging our engineers and employees all over the world to do this as well. We have a lot of great minds, so putting them all together for this small program is cool too. We did have one question come in from the audience. So,
okay, great.
So Matt West asks, Carl, could you be a little more specific about the source of greenhouse gas emission from TE factories or the energy consumed at our factories and the emissions from power plant sources?
Sure. So let me just make sure I get the question right. Source of greenhouse from, okay. So I'll start high level. You look at all TE's greenhouse gas emissions, 90% from energy usage, 10% from SF6 usage. Right. The 90% from energy is, you take that part of it and it changes year to year, but I think it's roughly 80% from using electricity and about 20% from using fuel. It might be lower than that for the fuel. And so the fuel use is sort of is direct. In fact, in the greenhouse gas emission world, you call that scope 1. So direct, our activities directly result in greenhouse gas emissions. So we're burning fuel to heat a plant. We're burning fuel for our ships. And let me come back to the ships in a second. Then the other 80% of our energy usage is from buying electricity. And so, we're not ourselves directly generating the greenhouse gas emissions. That's from the power plant. But the way people look at this is that counts as a greenhouse gas emission for us. If we get more efficient, we're going to use less electricity. So I think it's sort of a matter of what do you control, what can you influence? So that purchased electricity is still something that we can influence and that is a contributor. So I hope that answers the question on where our emissions come from, factories and so forth.
Great.
You think so?
I do.
Okay.
Hope so. Thanks for the question.
Oh, I wanted to mention the ships because you asked about engineers and other people doing things. When we started this years ago, we most of TE is factories and making electronic components, but we have the ship company that's out there laying fiber optic cable across the ocean. It's incredibly cool.
Yeah.
And the folks in the ship company, recognizing that they burn a lot of fuel, that has a big impact. It costs them a lot of money. They started looking at, okay, how do we operate our ships? What speeds and what routes do we take so that we use less energy? Then they looked at when the ship is sitting in port, which they have to do because they have to be ready to go out and make a repair. They have to be hooked up to power. But what can they do then to stop using or to reduce their usage? So just all kinds of examples of people doing great things. So thanks for letting me elaborate there.
For sure. It's very interesting, and I'm sure, I hope a lot of the audience has found it interesting as well. We haven't had any other questions come in. I think that we're done for the day, but we really appreciate your time, Carl, and it's been interesting to hear all about these programs. And thank you all for tuning in as well.
Thanks, Kristen.